So Peter, any chance you coming to Barcelona every now and then, no? Or you were, I mean, in the previous life that we all had.
No, I was 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh God.
I didn't know that.
Okay, I think we should stop mentioning year numbers. Now and then, no? Or you were, I mean, in the previous lives that we all had.
No, I was 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh God.
I didn't know that.
Okay, I think we should stop mentioning year numbers. Now and then, no? Or you were.
So you'll just have to shut off the secondary window.
I was 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh God.
I didn't know that.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're live. Hi everyone, my name is William Virgil. I will be the group leader for this evening. Not evening, morning for us, evening for some people. Hi everyone, my name is William Virgil. I will be the group leader for this evening. Not evening, morning for us, evening for some people. You have to.
Yeah, William, you can also like mute people if you want.
Mute people, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Okay.
William, you can also like.
All right, good to go. Little hiccup, but back on track. Okay, so thank you for making the time to joining us this morning. We have a lot of exciting projects. I'm going to ask all the critics, I'll call your names, and I want you to come to the front of the congregation and introduce yourselves just so that the students can see who you are. And that way, you know, they can put a face to the name. So we're going to start with Florencia Rodriguez. So if you can, you know, introduce yourself so that, you know.
Okay, hi, thank you. Nice to be here. I'm Florencia Rodriguez. I'm from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I'm based here in Buenos Aires right now, but I used to go back and forth from the US a lot. I am an editor. I'm trained as an architect, but I'm an editor. I do this publication called NES. I don't know if you've heard of it. And before that, I was publishing another journal that I created in Argentina that is called Plot. It's still ongoing, but I'm not going working there. So my career is between teaching, writing, editing, and that's what I do.
All right, thank you, Florencia. Okay, we have Evan Douglis.
Hi, everyone. I'm Evan Douglis. I'm the Dean of the School of Architecture at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. And I know a number of people on the jury today, and certainly the SCI-Arc community. And it's always exciting to see some of the most brilliant work being produced in the world today. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for joining us, Evan. Glad to have you here. All right, Anna.
Hello, my name is Ana Pla Catala, and I'm an architect based in Barcelona, but I was educated at DEEPAK and at Columbia when actually Evan Douglis was running a studio with Lon. And that's when I became very good friends with Hernán and Florencia. Then I worked at Foster's, and I also went to Columbia, and I worked at Eisman. I've been teaching at Harvard, Penn. Now I'm at DEA and at Torquato Di Tella, Florencia Rodriguez, with Ciro Nagle, and that's pretty much it. I'm super excited to see. Oh, I also taught at the Berlage for a moment, where I became friends with Peter Trummer. And so it's very nice to see all these faces worldwide and have a chat with you guys.
Nice to have you here, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay, we have Mette.
Mette.
Mette, okay.
I'm Mette Ramsgard Thomsen. I'm professor here at the Academy in Copenhagen. I run something called CETA, which is the Center for IT and Architecture, which you can see a little bit about in the ceiling here. Yeah, I know Florencia from her sporadic travels to Sweden with Hernan and Peter Cook, and that is my sort of in here.
All right, thank you for making the time. Peter Trummer.
Hi, everybody. I'm actually a professor in Austria, Innsbruck, on urban design. I made a really strange detour to the US over the Netherlands, where I used to live 25 years, in the antithesis, But what was great there, I actually did a postgrad study at the Belak Institute, which was basically a very great meeting plot. But as tough times come, schools vanish, and so did that one. And it feels a little bit sad that I cannot be anymore have an alumni, yeah, so it's basically gone. But somehow, as SCI-Arc is probably one of these really great places that allows us to participate, I became part of that, and I'm very thankful, and it was great also to be sometimes invited to Philadelphia to meet Evan. And of course, it's great also to meet all of you again.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for joining us. We also have Patrick Schumacher. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, good to see you guys.
Yes, so we want you to introduce yourself to the students and to everybody watching on YouTube. This is being live streamed in YouTube. So if you can just tell us something really brief about yourself.
Great, and welcome everybody. I mean, it's nice to be surrounded by old friends. Hi, Peter. Hi, Evan.
Hi, Patrick.
So I'm sure you're going to have fun. So, well, I've been, my relation with the SCI-Arc goes back many years. I've been multiple times in LA to join juries, lectures, events, and I'm a great fan of the school. I'm very curious what's coming up. I've been teaching at the AA, as some of you might know, for many, many years, and we've been kind of looking at the various, these schools have been looking at each other, observing each other. And well, I'm still working with Zardin architects, and mostly in Asia now. Over 80% of our work is in Asia, since everything else is slowing down, and basically 80% of this China, and then 6% the rest of Asia, including Singapore and other places. So that's where we are. Basically, Peter, I love your background. What is that?
This is my work, my friend, after I left parametricism.
It's great. I love these clouds, as you know. I mean, good stuff.
Yeah, listen, it would be cool to talk again once again, hopefully in our live.
Yeah. I don't know much about the project, what the students will show, so I'm very curious.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for joining us. We have Marika.
Hi guys. Sorry, this is one of my cats. I am the director of history and theory here at SCI-Arc, and so I've been advising a number of the students that we're going to see today, just in a secondary capacity, not in design, but just in terms of their discourse, where they might fit in with the discipline that we all are invested in. So I'm very excited to see their work. I'm glad to be here today. I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Marika. Nice to have you here. All right, so when we have thesis advisor Casey.
I'm Casey Rehm. I teach here at SCI-Arc, and I'm the coordinator of the Architectural Technology Post-Professional Program.
Thank you, Casey. Damjan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Damjan Jovanovic, and I teach at SCI-Arc as design faculty.
Yes, and we're going to be joined later by Tom Wiscombe. He's our undergrad chair. All right, I think we're ready to go just in time, 10:15. YIFAN, take it away.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is YIFAN Wang. I'm a Mark student, and my thesis advisor is Casey. And my topic is called Emotional Garden World. I will send a link in the Zoom chat. It's from the YouTube level, and then it's make the videos very smooth, and you can. So please, everybody, go to click that link, and I can play it on my computer. Okay, so does everybody see the title of it, Virtual Garden World? Okay, cool. I will start to play it. Yes, there will be 15 seconds when I play it, and then just like that. Okay, I think the video is over. And then you, thank you everyone. You can download this game by the link I sent to the Zoom chat. And also I will play no sound video over again during the meantime. Please wait. Yeah.
YIFAN, you want to describe a little bit about the different experience that the users have as they move from the different environments?
You mean the different levels, the different emotional levels?
Yes.
When they control the players, I don't think there's no difference. I think the point is you need to find the portal to back to the normal world, and then you can see you can follow how to say the environment in different levels. They're totally different, and also the geometries change. The animated shaders were kind of the animated sphere I created, to kind of let the players to feel that's what's difference between these different emotional levels. And then the other thing is it is not the same difficulty level between different levels work. For example, the anger is so difficult that the players control him to get the peak of the kind of monster, but in the other, like the surprise or something, just like a very easy way. So,
YIFAN?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? A few opening questions just to extend that. The rules of engagement have to be clarified. So for example, you've got a camera that you've determined its migratory route through this field. Should we assume that there are multiple players that can operate this virtual space? And what kind of control does the user occupant have? Is it simply about moving through a precondition, or does your position in space modify the landscape, the topography, the affects in any way? If you could speak to greater detail about the structure, the performative logic of the game as an operating system, that would be very helpful.
So I think in that I think that this last version of it, I just created like a single player version of it. So it will be the single player, and then all these geometries are given, they are not changed the position, they are not changed the ways they're showing, and then the player the start point is the same, it's on the same position on the ground. But I think in the development of this project, or maybe in the future, what I want to do is to create several or manipulators, like 3 or 4 players play together, enjoy the one or enjoy different levels, and then they can work together to figure it out. But for now, in that version of it, I think it just didn't change. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's quite clear. It's all a first-person perspective kind of ride through a landscape. I mean, first of all, congratulations to the virtuosity of the scape and the design. But I have a challenge to you. I mean, precisely because there is no interaction and therefore no performance and functionality, social functionality in this. So for me, the question is, I mean, I'm thinking about that as a form of proto design. What would make that a proper architectural design, or even virtual design of a virtual space? But then, as we would bring it into the design disciplines as a discipline that is, in my view, to be measured by performance criteria, with the task of framing social interaction and ordering social collaboration and coordination, etc. Whether it's in real space or in virtual space. For me, that's our domain. So if you would just have a contemplative ride, for me, that's maybe a different discipline. It's maybe entertainment, mass media, maybe psychology. Maybe this is an offering of some kind of counseling psychology, but maybe it's not architectural design or design. If it doesn't work, it doesn't perform work. So I think that's, but obviously it could, something like this could be thought through as a some kind of metaverse where the communicative work gets done because it brings together various participants who use the landscape to orient, and where some kind of there's either a host-wise distribution of places with particular communication communities or opportunities, or there's a landscape which gets kind of inhabited and settled in through some kind of self-differentiation, self-organization of a population. Would you accept such a challenge?
Yeah, I think so. For me, I just put this project attempt to create a new social game mode, which for now is a very easy mode for it. But I think if I continue to develop it, the perfect future blueprint for it, I think maybe it can be more interaction between the players and then the environment. The environment could be like generated, follow the player's action, or the players could change somehow the environment. And then this may be more, I think is what I need to do with. And also I think the virtual world to me is kind of like different, but use the same logic and then the kind of technology or skills when I designed architectural ways. So yes, I agree with you.
Where I'm coming from is, you could, let's say design a computer game, which is, a shooting game or some kind of entertainment where you just relax and switch off. I don't think this kind of entertainment is, in my view, close to or fits within the ambit of the responsibility of the discipline. But of course, you could imagine, virtual worlds like a virtual college, a virtual campus, a virtual world working environment. And for instance, Zoom itself as a platform, though it's kind of more 2D and graphic based, is some kind of virtual communication frames, and a colleague designed it, and it's fully within the design discipline's ambit. It's the kind of high performance, hardworking instrument of, in this case, collaboration, communication, framing social communication, and that's exactly parallel what architects do when they design a college, a campus, a corporate environment, but also other cultural institutions, etc. So that's where I'm coming from. So you need to put this to work, I would argue, rather than having some kind of experience, which you could like or dislike, but we don't have, it's not contributing to, let's say.
Yeah, I don't know though. I mean, we do have quite a rich history in design history of people designing intense emotional experiences, particularly in landscapes. So think, for instance, of Dessau Wörlitz or something like Stourhead or even Twickenham. You know, the tradition of landscape design in particular to evoke certain emotions as not a passive experience, but a personal experience is quite rich.
Hi, my name's Patricia Olenek. I haven't been introduced yet. I come from art design and architecture. I collaborate with architects. I'm not an architect myself, but I have a spatial practice. YIFAN, sort of tagging on to the comments that were made from the three distinguished critics, I would encourage you to look at the work of Char Davies and the work of her virtual reality installations, whereby players were individually immersed into environments in biofeedback vests. And in order for you to enter those environments, you had to alter your breath and your breathing and the pace of your breathing. So all of your biometrics impacted which spaces you were in fact allowed to enter. And so there was sort of, you know, getting to Patrick's comments, there was real work being done in order for you to enter the piece. So, and there's another artist, I just wrote a book chapter on Kwai Shen, who looks at ants and the way that the notion of play exists in both biological systems and environments, but also in game environments. And I think there's something there for you to look at as well. But, and then of course, the third thing has already been touched upon, whether or not you experience these environments individually or collectively, and whether or not collective behavior begins to impact the affect of the participant, right? But look at Char Davies. I'll put in the chat Osmos in particular, which was a piece in the 90s that she developed. And a lot of VR artists and artists that have spatial practices followed in her footsteps in terms of producing these environments that had a very, very, very strong kind of affect. So I'll type the information for Kwai Shen's work playing with ants. It looks like, Marika has already put in Char Davies' work, and but again, all of these works will help you to think about the emergent properties that you're actually building into the work. And I've done some VR work, and before I did any of these pieces I produced, or these mock-ups I produced, I had to write a Markov chain, and that's basically a diagram of all the different places you can go. But yeah, what is the trigger for you being able to go left versus right? You know what I mean? So it's that kind of clarity I think would be very, very helpful for you to develop in this piece. And I'll make my comments in chat now.
Thank you so much. Really helpful.
I wonder if I'm coming back to something we said early in the review. It might be interesting to wonder how this becomes architectural. I don't know what the task was. It feels like being stuck into a pool and then suddenly finding yourself in some sort of acid-like Icelandic landscape. I have no idea why. But if we go there with you, I think maybe one of the interesting things about architecture is, of course, the resistance of site, of program, of use, of weather, of all these kinds of place-making events that mean that what we build changes its value in time, and we are not in control. And this sort of filmic or game-like world that you present seems like you have control of everything. I assume that happy accidents have happened, and probably there's something you didn't quite design as you wanted it to be, and so on. But I'm not really talking about that. I'm more talking about that you meet something. And I wonder how, I was just thinking about if this is a nature where is weather? So where is the thing that makes the branches move in a particular way, or a storm or whatever? There's something about it being fully in your control, which reminds me of sort of, I mean, it shows my age, but sort of MySpace-y, you know, endless, you know, I can just go on, I make one more room, one more room, and there's no reason to refine because the territory is endless. And there, I wonder how you can introduce into the space something that allows you a bit of friction and allows you to contemplate whether your choices were right. I don't know if you...
Well, but we have no criteria as yet. So I want to come back to what Marika is saying. I mean, you might point to, you know, let's say certain garden designs where the functionality is maybe not so obvious. And maybe you're picking up a relatively marginal point, an example, but I think even there we would have to look at some kind of social instrumentalization, because these investments are not done kind of for a thrill. We have to give them a certain weight and societal purpose. And I would kind of, that would be my heuristic hypothesis, that we always find that where we have investment in architectural articulation. And if you look, for instance, at a palace, you know, the 18th century or 19th century, early 19th century, and the social life, its structures and organizes, and it's oftentimes gatherings also. Let's say we would now call them parties, and you have different settings. You distinguish different atmospheres, also different kinds of spaces, more formal, vast, large, structured, informal, intimate. And you have to imagine, of course, a social life, a distribution of different situations you want to experience if you join a kind of 8-hour social event or a 3-day or week of social events. And so when you're talking about here in this, you're creating different atmospheres, different emotional settings, different orders, and you have different moods and modes with light and so on. All of that for me would have to be scripted. Would start to suggest a differentiation of social situations you're going to now order and structure and offer, and you know, so that's what would bring it from my perspective. That would bring it into the domain of architectural or of design as such. And again, I'm saying, you know, if you look at graphic design, you have the same kind of form to function, let's say, tension, or this double coding, and you instrumentalize all your palette of colors, of typography, of iconography, whether it's in a magazine, in a book, or in another information space. So I wouldn't, that is part of our discipline, doesn't depend on whether it's physical or virtual, but whether it has these purposes and strategic deployments, rather than just a play with forms for later utilization, let's say.
Hey, I want to pick up on some of the great comments. I don't know if anyone on the jury has seen Laurie Anderson's installation at Mass MoCA, the Chalk Room. Patricia probably has.
I know it. I didn't get there in person, but I know it. Yes, it's a great reference.
It's profoundly uncanny. I have to say, I certainly recognize the opportunities afforded with VR, but there's a disproportionate amount of creative capital that's aimed at creating entertainment, as Patrick spoke about it, and really kind of intellectual distraction. And Laurie Anderson's installation was just unbelievably interesting. And you know, really briefly, she creates this floating city of towers, and both the atmosphere in the background and the buildings themselves are all black. And the only thing that is white upon approaching the city is you realize that the buildings are made out of chalkboard and all the letters are white and they're alive and they're luminous. And as you move through the city, language functions simultaneously as a literal semiotic device, but as an architectural proposition. It literally comes off of the surface of the buildings and rains down on you in the most glorious way. The summary here, oh, and I should also mention that as you move through the cities, you actually come across a series of gifts, and each of the gifts have embedded in them an internal conceptual logic. And that is to say that her entire game is based on the transmission of knowledge. It's not universal knowledge. It's not suggesting that there's a single meaning that everyone will obtain, but it's a combination of the sensation of moving through space, and at times it's rather hauntingly uncomfortable to the point where you may have to take the VR glasses off. I mean, people have gotten sick in that room. And then there are signifiers. So it's very, very sophisticated, both conceptually and operationally in terms of the scripting. And I imagine that they brought in some of the foremost leaders in this discipline to work with on this. So I would start off by saying that certainly VR and gaming has a tremendous amount of opportunity for our profession, and how apropos, given the fact that we're all meeting now online, that virtual spaces are going to become increasingly more important, that YIFAN will have to, like many of his colleagues in his generation, will have to assume control over the craft and not get distracted by a kind of, how should I say it, a kind of familiar iconography. In other words, is it possible with fewer variables in the game to initiate a greater amount of intensity and impact? This is a much longer discussion. Right now, currently, the game is in a very early formative stage, and I deeply appreciate the kind of raw promise of it. But I wonder whether there's too much, again, obvious complexity, and that's more, it's functioning on an iconographic level rather than a sensorial level, right? So this whole comment, or a number of us have said it or implied it, that moving through space in relation to the resistance of these architectural conditions, and that there's a one-to-one coding of your decision and your liberty in relation to the kind of resistance of the gaming condition. It needs to be absolutely defined. It also, you also appear to have a fascination with, if I may say so, pain and pleasure. And I'm not sure that needs to equate with certain imagery, but it brings us back to this question of resistance. That is, to be able to move forward in the game and to feel the difficulty and the kind of burden and effort necessary to transgress certain stations. And I mean that in a broad sense. It's not just spatial, it's conceptual, intellectual. That has to be figured out, right? I mean, and you could spend, this is your thesis, you could certainly spend a good portion of the next series of years in your career moving into an interdisciplinary realm to try to acquire the level of intelligence and once again, ownership over these mediums in order to distinguish yourself as an author, so that you are able to shed all cliches and as Patricia had noted, there's reference to certain individuals in the world in the 21st century that are leaders in these areas, and you would want to assume that same kind of status. But there's going to be a tremendous amount of commitment, self-reflection, and real interrogation of the tools and systems that you're working with.
Thank you, critics, for the great comments. YIFAN, great display of mastery of the tool. As the critic said, you know, I think the next step will be kind of like, you know, evaluating the behavior that each one of us as users will have in the space. But an amazing project, and congratulations on completing your thesis.
Thank you so much.
We have to move forward, and the next person is Lou. I want to take this time to introduce, or let Patricia introduce herself. I missed her at the beginning. My apologies for that. So Patricia, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, just so that the students and the viewers can put a face to the name.
Oh, William, thank you. And there might be a reason I might not be on your list. I was just informed by my inviter, Florencia Pita, that I'm actually in the wrong group. I hopped into the wrong group. I apologize. So I'm waiting on instructions from her as to whether I should stay or go, but my name is Patricia.
You should stay, definitely. Great.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm at Washington University in St. Louis. I just stepped down after 13 years being a director of the Graduate School of Art. I'm the, I think I have 6 courtesy appointments here, and you know, in everything from the medical school to the Biodiversity Institute. I collaborate with architects and designers, and I run a program in New York that you are all welcome to participate in. It's part of the Leonardo Group, International Society for Art, Science, and Technology, and I co-direct the program for the New York chapter of that. And so if you want, just let me know in the chat if you'd like to be added to the email list. And this really brings together artists, architects, critics, writers who are interested in the art, science, technology nexus. So that's me in a nutshell, and thank you for having me.
Great, thank you, Patricia. So good to have you here. I mean, I don't know if they're gonna miss you in the other review.
I don't know. I may hop out if Florencia said get to G. So forgive me if I do, but I'm loving this group, so I'll stay until I'm instructed otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Lou, take it away.
Thank you. Hi everyone. My name is LIU QIAO. I'm gonna do a screen share right now. Let me know if there's something, if you can't hear clearly. I also send a link to the chat. It's a YouTube chat. It's the same video, just in case you can't hear the video sound clearly. Thanks. Here we go. My project topic is defining the 2020 pop futurism. The manifesto of futurism read as a rejection of the past and a celebration of speed, machinery, youth, industry, and urbanism. The ideology has evolved throughout the years. It starts a conversation today like, how do we vision the future now? Where are these visions come from? When we start talking about futurism in the modern day, there is a common aesthetic value keep repeating and reoccurring, whether in the cinema photography or on social media. When we are trying to do continuous excitement, it makes the creativity become repetitive. The project starts with me gathering a massive database on the internet that relating to the term futurism city. When working with a neural network, I use AI as a tool to help me looking through and analyzing this massive database from social media. What it's trying to do is to look for the features that constantly repeating. Then I let it start to generate a series of images of futuristic city that have those repeating forms and geometries from a collective valued position out of the database. These images you are looking at right now are the result generated by the AI. In a way, these images are unique, but they are also commonly acceptable to relate to the futuristic city. You can tell a lot of familiarity among them. Then I want to extract the result out systematically and categorize them. Here is a catalog I summed up from the result. The purple represents the architecture feature, and the green represents the transportation features. I'm mainly looking at is the relationship between the transit system vs the building aspect, which is a fundamental formation of a city. By going through the process that extracting the 3D geometries from a 2D image, the formation logic is being re-understood and reformed. As you can see, the three-dimensional articulation makes the building feature more clearly. Then I reorganized these elements. The goal is to use the catalog to produce a master plan. The city has a new organization based on purely collective value. In order to make the city inhabitable, I identified the transportation system into 4 classes and designed them through the section to show different ways of how people can occupy in the city. The first one is a railed train system. The second one is a road for vehicles. The third one is the walkway for pedestrians. And the fourth one is auto delivery system. The urban design was established by analyzing this series of infrastructural consequences. The system adds a complexity and a logical understanding when the street blocks start to form and stacking on top of each other. These kind of formation will of course have architectural consequences that are different from our own city experience. The next step is to develop the projects on a closed-up human scale that can expand the life experience of the urban environment. The first example is a connection that solved the height difference of a transit system. This car elevator, featured in the middle of an apartment complex, resulted in an interesting phenomenon that the transportation and the building are united as a symbiosis. In a way, the apartment is facing the city no matter in what direction. The second vignette is a close-up city block that reviewed how different transportation systems are supporting each other on all levels, and how many different ways that people can occupy in this city. Besides the directions like north and south, there are also up and downs. The city can be read as a three-dimensional complex rather than a traditional flat master plan. The third moment shows how a variety of disproportionated and slim buildings are connected together, and what's it feel like to actually live here. By approaching a realistic city design based on purely organizational relationship among the urban elements, a new form of futurism starts to establish. It is a combination of a common aesthetic value plus the AI interpretation and plus the new organization. Thank you. Thank you. I'll start playing the video without audio right now.
Why are you calling it pop?
I believe right now what we're currently thinking is it fit into what we said pop culture is because the images that start everything is collected through the social media and through what we are sharing, like currently sharing. So it's kind of like fitting to the ideology, like what we believe right now, what the aesthetic is, and what we want the future to look like. In a way, it's like giving the idea what's really happening to our aesthetic towards the term of futuristic city.
And,
yeah, okay, go, Patrick.
I was just wondering about the process, the way, I mean, for instance, this image, how do you translate these images? It's quite intuitive again, or is there a method to this? Because in the end, you're showing a model you created. And I wonder the translation from the first of all from the AI generated and then selected image into the 3D model. That's some kind of loose interpretation. I wonder if that we could look at this closely, because that could be reminds me of the kind of 25 years ago when we used kind of artistic processes which generated some kind of strange image. But then there was a lot about the discourse about how we're translating that, because that's non-trivial, and how which aspects you're picking up, because there's always an excess of potentials in such an image, and the translation is not routinized, is not mechanized, is not another algorithm you have. And so we need to, I mean, there's a lot of the interest and potential of the project are in that translation moment. And that's why we call these diagrams, you know, Deleuzian diagrams or abstract machines. There's this kind of aleatoric process of translation. So I was just wondering if you could talk more about that and whether you're satisfied with this translation.
I agree. So basically, it's like the step of taking the ownership of the project. It starts with AI analyzing a series of images that are relating to the term futuristic city. So after the AI analyze, it's basically like a tool. After you finish analyzing and start to generate the images, me as the human factor will of course get involved in this process that actually start to have the selection, the pick. And also my project topic is defining the.
Oops.
Sorry, wait, wrong music.
I think in your video, there are some of these images which you used are kind of visible, right?
Sorry, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically it's me, like, and then I add to my own understanding, my own interpretation to the images, and extract the 3D geometries out of the 2D images.
And hi, I think it's very interesting the way in which you generated the images, but I was wondering if there was like a critical process in them, because you're just taking what you get and generating architecture from those images, but are you confronting with the results in any way of what is the city that you think it's the futuristic or the pop futuristic? Because probably, I don't know when you started this work, but I guess it's before the pandemic or something like that. But this year has challenged many of our thoughts towards the city. And I would like to know if you have confronted the images to some criticality and rethinking about what is a city right now, or what should be.
Yeah, so basically when I start gathering these images, there's a potential, like there's a criteria is what's we're having the idea what's the futuristic city right now. So that will be in March. So yeah, if I would collect the image again and let the AI to regenerate what's relating to term to the futuristic city, the result would be different. So this basically gave me a guideline, like it's a different way of how to develop a design process. Like it starts from a massive database, and then I start to manipulate with them. And then in the end, there's some architectural consequences, like that will make needed to be solved and problem need to be solved.
There's something, oh, sorry.
No, that's fine, Peter.
No, go on. You see, there's an interesting thing. It has a flair of a kind of megastructures idea of the 60s, and even some of the drawings of Manhattan of 1905, you know, from Scientific America. Yeah. And I wonder why, you know, because it seems like my question is when you have selected a database of images, yeah, the interesting thing is when you let the algorithm run, there is not really an identifiable entity that would say this is building or this is infrastructure. Yeah. There might, so first of all, the interesting thing is the database, the images have all these same features that you can recognize buildings versus streets. But then when you basically run the algorithm, there comes this blurry thing. And so basically what you do is there where it's blurred, where you consider it as not being of any information for you, it seems, yeah? And so reduce it back to identifiable entities, yeah? But why I'm saying that is because, you know, going back to the comments of Florencia and Patrick, because there where it's blurred, you also could have made a different interpretation and say it can be both, building and street. And why I'm saying that is because, you know, in the 60s, there was a difference between what is called a megastructure and a megaform. Because in one, the infrastructure was connecting buildings, that like in a megastructure, but in the megaform, the infrastructure was inside. The infrastructure was inside of the building. Yeah, basically there was a completely different architectural diagram. Yeah, so I think it would be interesting to see what have been done if the resolution of these images, yeah, would take some of the blurry aspect. Yeah. You know, the one that you don't know how to interpret to become part of your thing. Would have been interesting what that would be.
I agree. I just so that I don't forget and I lose myself in my thoughts, and also because I have to leave. William, by the way, I don't know if Florencia told you, but I have to leave in an hour because it's whatever. I like this project actually quite a lot. But obviously, it opens up all of these questions. The first kind of weak part or weak question would be for me the issue of interpretation. From the moment on that you say, I run the AI, and then I look at the pictures, and then I interpret them myself, then we have another chapter which hasn't been actually tackled, because your own interpretation is absolutely yours, it's subjective, it's psychological, but it's also cultural. So in a link to the previous project as well, if you deal with the emotional side, how do we define fear, sadness, cold, angry, and all of those worlds that were mentioned in a kind of, if we kind of think of gestalt, there is a kind of gestalt that we all have by culture and by subjectivity. So when you actually deal with some kind of abstract machine that it's generative, or that reads some kind of reality and kind of shifts it according to the information, which is basically data, you can have, in a way, two choices. Either you take the kind of role of a complete scientist with no, criteria beyond, let's say, efficiency of some sort, or you take the side of, or the role of an architect with intention, with agendas, and with intentionality. And then therefore the question of interpretation is super difficult for me and very difficult to tackle, right? Because of course you come from, I don't know, but probably some Asian country. The city that we're seeing, for us, we're a bit older, and it takes us directly back to megastructure, infrastructure, and bits and pieces that are connected. But at the end, cars, people, the only thing sort of new is a channel for drones, right? But in terms of city, Blade Runner, I'm sorry, does it much better. The last Blade Runner, okay? Because it really takes us to a world of, let's say, utopia, dystopia, etc. So as much as I would like to commend you, because I see certain rigor and certain kind of analytical capacity for analyzing the city in its components and its relationships between the components, and then the kind of question that Patrick kind of pointed about method and process, and how does one organize all of this data and kind of articulates a generative process that comes from an analytical beginning, then I think that you fail, or there is a weak kind of, or a question opened up as when, you know, you stop all of that, and then you just interpret it according to your own cosmos that you have in your own head. Because I could come and I would have a completely, maybe not completely, but probably different interpretation. So then maybe you have like a gate as to, you know, produce a palette of interpretation. And then I think you should test it, because we're in a user interface, user, you know, age, in where users are consumers, but are also prosumers, etc. And so I don't know that the interpretation of the sole architect at play directing our, you know, our lives is relevant in a way anymore, in the sense that, you know, a little virus, well, little, you know, a virus has changed our lives so much more than than Le Corbusier, I suppose, okay, or Patrick in his parametricism. So I think that you have to change or think about the rules and the tools and the techniques of using those tools, and then regulate, you know, how do you use them? Because with the same ingredients, you can make pizza or you can make a disgusting soup. So, you know, that's, I think, part of culture. I'll leave it at that.
Great comments. If I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Li Qiao?
Yes, that's correct.
Li Qiao. So on one hand, look, the imagery and representational portraits that you've created are beautifully evocative and spectacular, and indicate that there's a very gifted and creative author behind this thesis. So I just want to put that out there now, because I know the emotional upheaval of having to do a thesis and arriving at the end, and you have to distinguish the critique on one hand as an affirmation of your value as a future architect, and then with respect to the specificity of the thesis and the process that you have created as a strategy, are there ways to make it more precise in order to achieve a larger promise? So a number of my colleagues have mentioned the fact that, you know, if we move outside the bubble, the kind of theoretical ecosystem that you've created for yourself, and look at the world at large, what kind of work might a thesis like this offer? And I think it was Peter, and I'll kind of phrase it in a slightly different way. If in fact your larger intention is to reimagine unknown cities, that is to project, is it even possible to project ahead of your time into a future moment where you kind of move as a kind of a blind swordsman, and you pull something out of that ether that impregnates the world that you live in now, and 10, 20, 30 years from now, maybe something that you've discovered becomes realized, and it's brought back as a kind of beautiful gift. The best of the arts and science fiction and poetry and architecture is able to do that, but one has to look very closely at the operative techniques and the kind of ethics that you construct around those techniques that will allow you to move into that new domain. So one of the, I'll kind of work kind of in reverse here. As much as I love the project, some of the things that are missing are startling. Yeah, we are facing existential risks today. So it beckons the question, what is the relationship between the city and nature? And to what extent could the kind of classical paradigm that divides those two disciplines or domains needs to be challenged in a far more radical way? It's interesting, at no point during the genesis of your early work with artificial intelligence did you consider the possibility of drawing material from radically different sources, so as they came over as coded entities, they began to create some rather uncomfortable and problematized mixtures, right? I mean, the thing that I'm most attracted by the process is the idea of absurdity. And as Patrick mentioned, it's been used in every generation. The idea that we devise strategies of inquiry that consciously try to subvert a kind of predictability of familiar things in the world. And precisely by being placed in this uncomfortable and difficult territory, maybe something will appear accidentally that has tremendous potential and opportunity. So one thing was the relationship between the city, the built environment and nature. The other thing has to do with energy. One of the things that you seem so enamored by, and I agree with you, was when you started to play with the transportation systems, and yet the project as posited still follows a very classical paradigm in terms of the separation and distinction between infrastructure and buildings. And as Peter had mentioned, one might have thought with a greater amount of performative intelligence, and I'm talking about a new science and new technology, that these boundaries could be obliterated in favor of new kinds of activities and systems of behavior that we've never seen before. And then finally, my last comment has to do with energy, because it seems to me that in order to, in quotes, power this city, that once again, its relationship to nature has to be fundamentally different, right? And I'm somewhat, how should I say, kind of startled that the kind of atmosphere, the larger context, the way in which the infrastructure, the city sets up a continuous and evolving relationship to the planet and the atmospheres at large are not part of your thesis. But hell, you have the rest of your life to work on questions like this.
I mean, I want to come back. I mean, there's a tension in the project. On the one hand, you're building these models which, you know, have a certain rational systems rationality, an engineering rationality, and you show these vignettes where you're working things through. On the other hand, you're starting with this kind of strong image base. So where we wanted to get some kind of squint our eyes and get a kind of vision of the future. Is it Blade Runner or is it kind of Star Trek? Or is something yet? Is it the dystopian kind of messiness of, or is it something clean and sleek and ordered? Is it the Matrix? Is it, you know, of course, all of your models have this kind of full three-dimensionality. So there's a tension there, and you should be more explicit about that, where you want to go with that. And I think I want to comment also on the way you sample the images and how the AI process operates. I mean, you also would let us in more. So my feeling is that, I mean, the proper highly controlled AI process would just reproduce new versions, which I would recognize as another kind of city vision rendering, rather than this kind of shredded, half cubistic, kind of pointillistic, blurry image. So to some extent, the process itself is faulty, let's say, under normative categories, and has certain kind of, let's say, artistic qualities which the kind of a commercial AI project would reject, and you work with as a kind of creative glitch. And you have to kind of say these things, and because that's where some of the aesthetics are generated from. But then because we want something new, whereas the kind of controlled AI process doesn't want something. It wants something new, which is very much like what we had before. It's just this kind of, it's a bit like the kind of Chomskyan kind of generative language newness, where you create something which is new in a trivial sense. Never had mentioned that sentence before, but it's fully within a kind of systemic predictability of sorts. Here's something different at play through this kind of, and there's also this kind of, you know, style mixing going on. But again, I think these images, they're not even a style mix, they're something else. They're some kind of other process product which you use in new ways. So just want to, in a sense, I'm kind of laid out a bit more what I see in the project, which you should kind of more own and take position on. Anyway, I think it's a great project and has a lot of potential, but this kind of self-interpretation is something you need to own more.
I just want to take one last comment, and just not from the AI process, but from the idea of how does something new emerge in a city, yeah? And my conclusion is more and more that if something new emerges in a kind of, how is it called, George Kubler sense, yeah? Then things communicate with each other, and suddenly, you know, there emerges something because some kind of property of one state moves into a property of something else. And I will never forget when I saw Rehm Koolhaas's first diagram published of the high rise of New York. Yeah, it was an enlightenment to me, because suddenly I haven't seen a building in a city. I've seen land, yeah, moving into a building. So you see, to me, that is what I think, or at least this is what I'm interested in, is how something new emerges. And I think the new is perhaps where a radical shift in aesthetic properties emerge if they move together. Yeah. So I totally think it's great what you have done to say, well, I'm not doing that. I'm separating. I leave that how it is. A street is a street and a building is a building. Yeah. But I think the interesting challenge is if a city collapses through, or for example, the energy of economics, like Chinese city, then something emerges that is not as easy predictable. And I have to say, if I saw, and I don't know what it was, the houses on the roof of a shopping mall, yeah, you know, or the village on a shopping mall, that I thought is a radical new diagram, you know. Because suddenly the building takes on a property that it hasn't had before, becoming, I mean, real estate. Yeah, this is just as a little thing, but I think it's a great work. You know, thank you very much.
And I'll just say one statement, because I think that made me think, Peter, about science fiction writer extraordinaire Ray Bradbury and the book The Illustrated Man and the story Velt, V-E-L-D-T, whereby you could change the skin of surface, right? You've got these cars and this movement through this city. And I'm wondering how the user or the participant could in a way shift what is being projected, which could even have an environmentally responsive system built in. But I wonder if fiction, I'm gonna just put it in the chat to everyone. I'm wondering if this one science fiction piece could provide a kind of template for you to engage all of the terrific critique comments that you've heard today, whereby the skins of the surfaces of the buildings themselves would shift by way of the movement through the city. Just a suggestion. Yeah.
Please put it in. Yeah, please.
Okay. Thanks.
I think it's very interesting to hear the discussion. I think working quite a lot with machine learning, I think there's something about, there was a comment at one point about that I think it was you, Evan Douglis, that you said that if you don't introduce something new, it will just reproduce. And there is some sort of tristesse around the actual detailing of the buildings that you're showing now, where we see the video so many times and we come across zoom-ins and you think, I look at it and I've been looking at Fritz Lang's Metropolis at the same time, and they're practically the same facades. It's 100 years later. And there's something about that we have also run workshops relatively similar on these machine learning algorithms that allow us to use images for reproducing and taking them into the city as a sort of playful way of understanding the technique. And it is true, it reproduces kind of the city that you live in. So our version of this would be nice little brick houses that would to fifth story. Your version in Los Angeles gets another sort of reality around it. But I think maybe you are wanting something different from the tool. You wanted to be able to break the mold and create this difference, a difference that allows you to reinterpret the city. And I wonder, yeah, I just wonder if it's the right database that you're addressing, if it's the right kind of way of constructing your base knowledge from which to make a springboard. And maybe it would be interesting to look at different ways of living within the city, to be able to challenge what is being produced through the algorithm.
Or challenge the algorithm into producing some kind of madness, which then would yield. No, I mean, in a rigorous way, you know, rigor and madness. So in a rigorous way, in terms of tool, technique, method, process, but produce some kind of madness in the sense of the aesthetic qualities that Peter was tackling. And so that we do not reproduce, you know, Mette reproduces the nice Copenhagen, I reproduce the Barcelona, because this is what we are. Because simply I was born there. I didn't even choose it. You know, it's embedded in me because I've seen it all my life. So my interest as an architect, so to speak, would be to actually produce newness, even if it's worse, but then we can analyze it, right? But in order to produce newness, we have to distill ourselves from all these kind of apprehended know-hows or you know, truths that we carry with us. So I think that for me, one of the values of machine learning and artificial intelligence is that the engines are strong enough to push them to the limit where we don't control anymore at some point in time. Yes, and I think that's a very difficult thing to do, even for me and as a student for sure. But then I think that, you know, the data bits that you insert need to go one step beyond the car, the highway, the drone. Certainly the city of today is an energetic being and a nature, and it needs to deal with nature, even more so since last March. And what is nature? Nature is no longer a series of trees planted every 2 meters. Okay, so, you know, I think that you have the potential, and I would just like go mad for a while. I think the combination of rigor in the process and tooling, and then madness in what we can imagine. So how do you actually regulate this kind of control and imagination? Because we don't, or at least that's my position, I don't like control to be suppressive of imagination. I don't like imagination to be free-flowing and then, you know, without any criteria beyond what I feel today. So, but I think that you're in a very good place. I'll shut up now.
Just final comment. I just want to say that maybe I'm repeating myself, but it seems to me that there's a kind of unstated acceptance of the syntax of architecture. That is, that the canon of architecture as a prescriptive kit of parts that's for some reason needs to be sustained and honored. And I really think what everyone's saying in different ways, that there has to be a far more aggressive stance in terms of challenging that authority, which may be inadequate at the end, at this moment in history. And I can't, my sense is that if you're gonna, once you go into artificial intelligence and we set up this kind of temporal collaborative relationship with this vast database, that the curatorial control over that database is incrementally more important, exponentially more important, sorry. That just because you have more data doesn't mean you have more meaning. And that it can effectively move into the discipline of architecture and have the kind of impact as promised that you'd like. And I just think, you know, if I were to use another term, the kind of transhumanism, the way in which the kind of bleeding and the kind of genetic fusion of things that are known and unknown that are synthetic and living constitutes an entirely different kind of alphabet and nomenclature. And it's so just kind of remarkably ironic that the car that's been here since the 1950s is running around this new city, that the project has to operate simultaneously from the bottom up and from the top down. And to be honest, you have to be, when you make a thesis, you have to be brave enough to say, I'm not in my thesis, it's not about a resolution. It's about a process. It's about moving through a whole spectrum of iterative possibilities simply because I need more time and I can't finish it in 6 months and 1 year. And I don't care if I have critics on the jury that say to me, that's not a city, it's not resolved. There's a lot of missing parts. No, but the process is authentic and the search is authentic, and it becomes a kind of catapult for this particular author to go out into the world and reimagine the future in a profound way.
I want to add a very short comment regarding that. I think, yes, it's great, and it's probably a part of a process of an author, and it needs to keep forward. But there's something about the idea of newness that I just have in my mind, because Anna mentioned that and somebody else also. And I think we always have to be very critical to that. It's great to create something new, but what do we want to respond to with a new? Because this is very new in a creation in terms of using artificial intelligence, but the image of this city is like the future of the past in a way, no? It was new in the 60s, it was the dream that this thing that was kind of sublime. And I think, I don't remember the name of Lin, is very young and probably hasn't seen Blade Runner and all the movies and things that we have mentioned, or maybe she did. But the thing is, what is new today? What should this respond to? And probably to have created this very potent city and idea, and to confront it with that is going to be great to understand how do you want to stand to your future right now.
Well, I think the city image before COVID and maybe the new discoveries we're making currently, it would have been very pertinent for me, an image. It's not only, maybe the 60s anticipated this, and you know, postmodernism seemed to be denying that. And you know, Rainer Benham was writing the future of our recent past. I think that came out in the maybe in the late 70s or 80s and so on. And it seemed to kind of trash all of this, but we're back into this territory. And I believe in the three-dimensional city and high-density urbanization and intervisibility and intermixity and so on. That's all in that image. So that for me, at least until last, you know, until 10 months ago, was a very credible conception of where we should be going, and even in terms of environmental, you know, the real high order urban concentration for the intensified knowledge economy, etc. So for me, that these are images make sense on that level. And I agree with you. You shouldn't just have newness for the sake of newness. We need to understand what's new in our culture, where the societal demands and technological opportunities, and to make something, an innovation which has actually value enhancing, prosperity enhancing, freedom enhancing, etc. But I feel that these images speak towards that.
Well, you know, the Garden City will be back, you know, but the Garden City will be back.
Yeah, I was probably worried more about the idea of nature and energy that Ivan, I think, or Peter mentioned before. And I think that is something that probably even 10 months ago we would be thinking differently. So nature and energy, and in which world we are creating the city, is something that should inform this project for me.
I mean, just to finish, but I come from, I mean, I am in Barcelona, but I am from here. And we have like a really left-wing mayor, first woman ever, like Occupy Wall Street disciple. And she has managed, if not doing much more, at least she has managed, let's say, to block cars. Okay, so we have, well, you all know Barcelona is a kind of, you know, as a tropic grid. We have these blocks. One block is 113 meters. Now we have super blocks, which are going to be not 3 by 3 blocks. And within those things, there are garden islands or pedestrian islands, which of course has bombarded commercial. I mean, there are as pros or cons, etc. What is clear is that they want to go back, or, you know, generally in Europe, I think, it's about going back to the pedestrian city. And as Peter said, it's a kind of new Green Deal. Yeah, it's a kind of new garden. The car is demonized, all right? So, of course, you're in LA, totally different scenario. But if you would like to, for this to be like a kind of tool or a manual of use of some sort, which is not a kit of parts, but, you know, as new, I don't intend, you know, to invent. This urgency for invention of the new is also, I think, something which is a bit childish, but, you know, relevant for our contemporary city of the 21st century. And at least in Europe, it's definitely not about cars. So, you know, you could even get political, which is something that I don't really like very much in the relationship to materiality. But if you now come and show this project in Barcelona, I mean, you would get bombarded just because you have a car. End of story.
So Lynn, I would say great job. Your project reminds me a lot of Chris Burden's project, Metropolis 2. And I remember looking at his exhibit a long time ago in LACMA. I don't know if maybe before all this you had the time to check it out. But, you know, and he has like you know, the question about that Anna just posted about the car is very interesting, because in his exhibit, he uses a car to kind of like create this and give us like the intensity and kind of like what happens in a very dynamic city. So if for me, and I guess this is a question that I'll post to the critics, is like, how can we use, or like how can Lynn could have used AI to start translating that you know, feel of being in a different city, while, because when I read the project, I see that all this highway, I read that as the new landscape. I'm not looking for, okay, so where is the greenery? Where's nature? For me, maybe in this future possible world, like this is nature. The way that we kind of like navigate through our cities, that's what becomes the new nature. So my question to you guys is, how do you guys think AI might be able to, you know, facilitate or solve this problem?
Actually, a very good question, William. I would just, you know, it's interesting because if I were to oversimplify the operative technique, it performs two transformational affects. One is it unmakes the found system, and it does so in a way that it resides simultaneously between 2 and 3 dimensions, and it still retains a certain reference to the texture mapping. So I think there would, and it's a good question, because there are a lot of people, there are a lot of design instructors in schools all over the world using this platform. And I suppose one of the questions is how to manage it in such a way that you can distinguish yourself as an author. And then at what moment do you apply meaning to the outcomes, right? And does it go through a series of iterative loops? We're not privy to the full process that these students underwent. So it's not clear to me to what extent is there a certain criteria that's established in order to understand what the spectrum or range of performative outcomes might be, and to what extent do some of them move forward in the selection process as it moves closer to architecture. It's a much longer discussion, William, and one of the things I would be somewhat careful about is that it sometimes arrives in terms of a representational iconographic system as though it's carrying a certain complexity, a kind of a deep kind of multiplicity of interest. That could be an illusion, right? So again, once you move from 2 to 3 dimensions, that's a critical interpretive leap. And to what extent, this is something I mentioned earlier, do you retrieve a series of familiar preconceptions or kind of challenge those insofar as you let the absurdity move forward into the gaming as it gets into 3 dimensions for a while until you're able to kind of decipher it appropriately?
I think that's, Evan, I think that's the kind of perfect summation of what Lynn was, or sorry, it's Lou, but her thing says Lynn. Lou's been trying to grapple with, and also kind of going back to, I think Patrick had a great comment about the issue of what's known as inductive stagnation. We've been running these kind of artificial intelligence, like image projects for a few years now, and there's a kind of trap of the kind of project that seems to be dominating is a sort of kind of hybridization, surrealist image production. And we've been trying to find alternatives around this issue of the inductive stagnation of the kind of projects reinforcing pre-existing ideas. So I don't know if you're familiar with Enrique Walker's kind of theoretical work on the problem of the cliche in design, but we decided to take that kind of operation this summer. So Lou used social media posts on futurist images. So we scraped the web for what social media people thought futurism meant, right? Which is going to be an inherent trap of repeated cliches, Blade Runner knockoffs, all of these things, with the idea being that we would use the network to kind of push super far into it, start to expose all those tropes, and that it would be the kind of the innovations or the kind of peculiarities or idiosyncrasies would start to emerge at those moments, like where there's a car elevator going through the center of an apartment building, and how Lou would have to kind of renegotiate that. So it's definitely a very different take on the problem of the kind of feed forward intelligence and the kind of collectively valued production of an idea about the future. But I also think it's very much at home with the futurist projects of the past, which really aren't about the future so much. It's just like extrapolating a narrative from an extant piece of technology. And it's doing that same thing, just with a kind of different approach. And also kind of hilariously to Patrick's comment about the shredded images, that was more fortuitous than anything, in that we lost access when COVID struck to our giant fire-breathing GPU machine. And if we had run this thing a few days longer, it would have been kind of photoreal images, which I honestly think would have been an even greater trap for Lou. Like, it would have been so paralyzingly detailed in terms of reproducing what the internet thinks the future looks like, that there maybe would have been even less room for interpretation. So, I mean, it's a really kind of abstract and I think still very open problem that Lou is trying to find a way into grappling with. And I really appreciate her efforts into this territory and finding a moment to also institute her own intentions into that kind of overwhelming process of what billions of people think the future looks like and whether that has any value or not.
Oh, for sure. I think that it's super valuable. I mean, I'm sorry, it's reminding me of a project that we just did at the AA with facial recognition and typology. And so we were crossing typological columns, for instance, or typological facades, and then we were running them through facial recognition, and then the algorithm would get incredibly confused. So if you would take them to the parliament in England, etc., at some point, because of the image, you can trick the algorithm. And all of a sudden, it makes the same mistakes as with facial recognition, properly detecting racial features and giving misinformation. And at some point, there is this potential for misreadings, even if they come from hyper-realistic, as Casey is saying now. The real algorithm is not perfect, and you can actually cheat it. And I think that there's a huge potential in there as what do social media think of future cities, but also what does the algorithm understand, in my case, not as future cities, but as a simple Gothic, or Doric column or a Pilotti, and it confused it. And so at some point he was saying the algorithm was reading a facade, and because of how we would draw it, it would detect a non-institutional building when it was in front of the England, the Parliament of England kind of thing. And so that kind of opened up an array of what you, I think, say interpretation. So I think that the moment of interpretation would be much better if it's mediated with some kind of objective data, huge worldwide database, Facebook, whatever, because it's an interesting debate. I'm sorry, I got carried away because I found it very interesting at this moment.
Thank you, critics, for the amazing comments. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll come back at 11:03. And thank you, Lou. Good job on the work, and congratulations on your thesis.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back shortly.
William, 15 minutes? Okay.
5 minutes.
5.
Yes.
Hi, William. Sorry, I just want to ask if we are going to live stream our project on Twitch. Can you also show that for the YouTube live stream?
I have the YouTube link. Do you need that?
Yeah, no, that's not what I mean, because we are going to share a link, a live stream link.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
just like YIFAN did.
okay, so I think you want to send it in the chat once you start your presentation?
Yes, but if we don't share anything through room, through the Zoom, I think the YouTube won't get anything.
No, that's what I'm saying. Send it in the chat, and I'll forward it to the YouTube.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, you guys want to send me the link?
I don't know if people hear me. William, I'm sorry, but I have to leave at 9.
Yes, Pia, we can
Which
hear
is
you.
just like 1 minute in my clock. And I'm so sorry because it's really getting very interesting.
Okay. Thank you
anyway,
for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting. And to my friends that I knew from before, Peter, hope to see you soon. We should be much more in touch. And Evan.
It was a fantastic to hear you again.
Yes, it was. It was.
Stay in touch.
Yes. Evan as well.
Yes.
Yes. Let's,
great to see you
yeah.
after all these years. Wow.
I know, I know.
You look
I
terrific.
look the same. I look the same.
25. Perfect.
It's this filter. It's this filter. Now I know that I look virginal and like no wrinkles. Completely not true. I mean, it's Instagram filters. They're free. You can download them and they make you look incredible. Okay, guys, big hug and alarm. I have to leave. Good. Florencia Rodriguez, I am in UT DT, Torquato di Tella this semester with Tito. So maybe you could join for a review or something.
I would love that. That would be great.
Okay. So I'll
With
just,
pleasure,
yes, it's actually nice, this Zoom world that we're living, because we can be all in touch. That's the upper side. Okay, big hug. Well done, students and tutors. Casey, nice job. I love your work. So it was nice to see it, to see the students. All right. Bye.
All right. So we're going to start. We're joined by our undergrad chair, Tom Wiscombe. Tom, I don't know if you want to say a few words, introduce yourself. So that
hey, Evan.
Hey, Tom.
A long time, man. Good to see you. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Hi, Patrick, if you're still there.
All right, great. Okay, guys, take it away.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I'm here. I'm still here.
Hey, Patrick.
Good to see you, man. Good work so far.
So, shall we begin?
All right. So, hey, my name is MIXUE QI.
My name is Jiexun Wu. And our thesis project's name is The Memory City.
We are going to send you a Twitch live stream link that you need to click in our presentation. And I will count down 20 seconds for everyone to open up.
Let's begin.
thesis.
Okay, now we'll loop our video and some pictures. And for our project, we both agree that browsing our deceased person's social media's timeline can in no way compare to something like a visit to grave. It even can be the experience of pulling out a photo from the anvil. We're always eager to keep the traces of a dead person's life to settle into fixed space and objects. So we designed the software to be our container to hold memories.
Also, personally, since we started doing this graduation project, I have always hoped that I can do something for my own regret through this opportunity. I once lost someone very important to me and never had a chance to see him for the last minute, nor to attend his funeral. So I hope this design can not only make up for my personal regrets, but also hope this design can comfort anyone at any point in the future, as it once comforted me. We hope you all enjoyed our presentation. Thank you. We will keep this video looping. Also, if someone missed the sound in our video, we will also share our statement to you.
Well, just to kick it off, hey you guys, that was great. It was like entering a kind of dream world, and the voice was interesting. It was like a kind of narrator to a video game. I felt like we were in a bunch of different ontologies there for a second. I totally understand where you're coming from with the kind of this idea of death and memory and the afterlife and all of that, and I see that's important to you guys. But I would say though that what comes across in the project is something that's not really a personal project, but a super relevant project of our time, and that is that you've substituted a kind of, I don't know, you've produced a kind of subjective way to think about cities that's a platform nonetheless. So it's not just about a kind of sentimental subjectivity, but it's a subjectivity that's that refocuses, let's say, urban planning in the eyes of the individual. And I thought that was super powerful. Like the dashboard here that you have with, like, there was one before this. I love creation speed and destroy speed, hilarious. I don't know what it is, but the one before that was like really hardcore, things that we identify with urban planning. There was like setback or maybe overhang or height limit. And I saw that, the little sliders being adjusted as this subject moved through the city. And I think that's so interesting, that like bringing in that POV to the idea of planning in larger layouts of cities rather than the sort of sardonic view, above the city looking down in the conventional master planning mode. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think that the outcome, I think is also worth talking about. The outcome meaning like what comes out of it. And I think that, I can't not relate it back to earlier visions of the city, particularly collage city idea, where the game pieces really are moved in and out of the sphere, almost independent of one another. And of course, there are lots of counterpoints to that idea of the collage city, and itself was a counterpoint to the modern city. But I think that it's lively and fun and feels like a game. So I think just for me, I think that the implications of what you're doing in terms of the platform, in terms of moving that subjective point of view, and just the playfulness of the whole thing, I think is really surprising and amazing, and maybe goes beyond the subtext of it being a project of memory and a project of kind of depth. So while I understand that that's important for you, and therefore it's important for the project, I think that your project's doing a lot more than that, and it's super interesting.
I just have a few questions. I mean, my first comment is I don't understand what a project of depth is. I also don't know what a project of memory is. We need to elaborate a little bit. The question I had for you is, what's the purpose and use case and, let's say, target market of users for this construct, even if it's a prototype? And I don't think that I mean, Tom said it was talking as if it was a planning tool. It didn't come across as such. So there's a direct question: what's the construct's purpose? And I just want to make another comment, which is maybe also, I'm curious about the, you're talking about in subjective terms, and you refer to your own kind of history of loss, and as if this kind of thing you're constructing here is some kind of tool of psychotherapy, a grieving aid or something, and that would put it outside the domain of architecture. But also, I don't trust this, because in a way what you've done is you picked up the phrase memory, and then you went to the architect who was working with this in the 70s, let's say Aldo Rossi. It's a kind of take on Aldo Rossi. That's maybe also why death comes in, because he had modern symmetry. And then you also go back, and then the interior is a super studio piece, which comes from the same period. So once we point that out, a lot of your, and you even not mentioning that, a lot of what you kind of trying to, the rhetoric you're surrounding this project with is also kind of becomes suspect. But again, the question is, what is the construct, purpose, use case, and let's say paradigmatic user base? Is it a planning tool? I don't think it is, in your view. Can you have a go at this? Or somebody else? Step up.
So, sorry. So, I think our most immersive thing is the third thing, which you can see, the middle part of the image. Also, we call that the super studio interior. So that is the point people can really get in touch with the memory of someone who someone they loved or someone they remember.
Well,
so we made a.
You're making a claim. You're ascribing a potency to this, which on the face of it seems kind of just a tag on a claim you make, which I think is, so that doesn't convince me. We understand it's a virtual world you're generating, so but is it entertainment? Is it psychotherapy, or is it somehow does it more serious work? We had earlier a discussion about virtual environments, maybe virtual college or virtual conferencing or a virtual workplace where we meet up. That would for me count as design tasks with purposes which are quite similar and in the domain of, let's say, the design discipline, which includes architecture. Here it's less clear. So you frame, the project isn't, I think, clearly enough framed. You're picking up some references, you're toying with some aesthetics, you're learning some tools, but the status of that experiment isn't clearly framed. I mean, that's my challenge to you. I mean, I think, of course, to work with the virtual and work with with you know, virtual cities is interesting, and that could have many application cases and purposes which then drive the further development. But talking about, you know, this kind of a memory world which allows you to reflect on death and losses you've experienced in your life, I think is absolutely not credible whatsoever in my appraisal. So that's a challenge to you.
Okay, can I ask you something? Is this a virtual cemetery you're designing? I mean, is it a?
What would that be?
No, I mean, I'm just saying, are you designing like Rossi, Modena? Is that what you're aiming? Is it a heterotopia?
I guess you can say that.
I mean, I'm saying this because I tell you the context why I'm saying that. I have a friend who told me, yeah, that there are projects out there, yeah, where people start to make copies of individuals when they're alive, yeah, so that relatives can meet them once when they die, yeah. So basically, there is a idea that you can meet, yeah, your loss, yeah, as a fictional real copy of this person. And so therefore, in order to meet that copy, yeah, they need an environment to, you know, to meet. I mean, there is a space to meet that copy of this lost person. So the voice, the sound, yeah, because it gets recorded. So is there something like that, what you're doing here? That there's a, because you see, my difficulty, I agree to Patrick, is it, let's say, you know, a strange Rossianius abstraction, you know, which you mean basically there is an aesthetic appeal of abstract realism, you know, because Rossi's really interesting idea was to take something that was real and abstract it. So what you see, if, for example, when you have this one thing there, you know, this is an urban house. And the reason why this is an urban house, because for him, this is the place where in Modena, yeah, the people are meeting the last time, you know, the dead body. So in order to find now a representation, a monument for that, yeah, he took that object of the city, yeah, as a symbolic sign. So the idea when you talk about monument, for Rossi, it was the idea that a place meaning the city, gets confronted with the signifiers of that city, you know? And so basically there is a construction that you cannot have a monument without having a place. So I have the feeling that you replace that place as a virtual VR, yeah, and then so I see something, but I would like to also grasp it a little bit better for me. But yeah, so that's why my question was if it was a place, a cemetery that you're doing. So I just, you know, if it doesn't resonate to you, it's fine. It's just something that happens to me with my own imagination. Yeah.
No, we had a discussion earlier today because we've seen a number of projects that were using gaming platforms, and it seems to me the question of reward and consequence need to be defined on some level by the author. I mean, you know, it's interesting because you're talking about monuments. We're dealing with Black Lives Matter and Confederate monuments, and the whole notion of how objects are imbued with a certain kind of social and even visceral sensibility that can initiate fear or oppression or hate or loyalty I mean, it's pretty interesting, and there's been a lot of debate in the last 3 to 4 months about the removal of these objects. It's a really complicated ideological discussion. Should they be removed and destroyed? Can you, in fact, erase historical events? Or should they be recontextualized, as Peter said? If you move a memory device to a different context, to what extent is it able to sustain the tracery of its former meaning? Really, really interesting things. And the reason why I bring it up, other than the fact that it happens to be timely, because I use the term consequence. So, you know, memory machines are not necessarily, you can't equate them to be pleasure machines. For some, they're horrific, and they constitute an existential threat. I'm incredibly enamored by the kind of visual dexterity of the work and the exuberance of it, and the fact that you recognize that at different scales, the game might have a different impact, and certainly offer a different experience for the user. Like my colleagues, I'm a little less clear about how to use this game, this machine, as a kind of productive cultural tool. I certainly think it has an enormous potential. And I must say that the one, I don't know if you called it phase territory, that's most compelling is probably the non-gravitational one, where the objects are floating. And if it wasn't for the generic context of a kind of office interior, I'd be fascinated with how to manage the flotation of those objects. And it brings us back to the Laurie Anderson analogy I used earlier. The whole notion of gravity in her project was radically redefined. And it is interesting to what extent do the icons, the canon of architecture relies on the index of gravity as an axis that's imposed on those bodies. And the moment you remove gravity from them, how do they change? And how might architecture change, in fact, if there wasn't an axis of gravity?
But Evan, can I challenge you on this one? I mean, you mentioned Anderson. It's an art installation, and I just think that although an art installation could become an inspiration for an architectural project, it is not an architectural project. And isn't it at least as an aim on the horizon for any work with an architecture school, that there is a project aimed at or contributed to, which would stand up as an architectural or at least a design, and now expanding that, a design project that is within the real world. And that might be a virtual world which has particular purposes. So that's where I'm coming from. And so it just in terms of clarity of criteria of success, of versioning this tool, if it is a tool, but it isn't a tool if it doesn't have a purpose. So yes, this project is in that state of toying and kind of an art, as an artist would show a project and say, I'm working with inverted commas and memory, with depth, with association. I'm working with references, with this. I'm working with the 70s, but working with here means only toying with and generating stuff, which, if it wanted to enter a kind of rational discourse of our discipline, would require an architect with the purpose to then translate and transform and instrumentalize. And that's what is lacking here. And there's not even a consciousness of this. Of course, within the discipline, we have characters and we have experimentation and exploration in schools which don't reach that, which are semi in a little bit like the art world, but they're set in the context where we know what an architectural project would be and what the steps would be, and the framing. So I think the framing, and of course it makes sense whenever something new comes in, let's say the II potentials and the gaming worlds and the virtual worlds. So that makes our discipline more art-like. It's actually the same what happened when we first were confronted with computational tools and animation tools, etc. But I think it would be very helpful if, nevertheless, one would understand what could be a possible architectural project or design project, and that would be a virtual interface of communication versus a physical interface of communication. What that would be and what we're working towards. I think that would be very highly useful for framing, and that's not something I put on Laurie Anderson, but that's what I would put on SCI-Arc or anybody presenting thesis projects within SCI-Arc or any other school of architecture.
Well, Patrick, I don't know, I interpret those comments in two different ways. On one hand, I agree with you that one has to, the criticality of the project has to be understood, and the authors have to be responsible for. No,
I think the instrumentality has to be understood. And then there's an element of criticality with respect to other projects which have these aims. Criticality itself is not, again, a project in my view.
No, I agree with that. There are many more questions that have to be asked. When you call it an architectural project, it's a little vague. I see this as some kind of delivery system, and that there's knowledge somehow embedded in the game that has to be accessed, and the terms of engagement are a little bit unclear right now. And
yes,
certainly it's biased.
A proto planning tool. It could be a virtual space of encounter, but then for who, with what agendas, with what purposes, etc.
Yeah, may I say something about it? I will say. Yeah, I think all the comments are really spot on in many ways, but some of the maybe criticisms to me seem like a little bit of like the low-hanging fruit when it comes to tool making, and especially when it comes to this idea of producing software after, let's say in the post-digital age where software is becoming more a cultural and less of a technical problem. So I think the way that they thought about this project was that they are constructing a platform, but they're also constructing a space of encountering of traces of memories of other people, and this becomes kind of collapsed. The theme of the project is very much about collapse of different intentionalities and different technical, let's say, expertise moments. And it's really less about Aldo Rossi. Aldo Rossi was kind of an excuse, I think, to start from. But I guess what they were maybe working on is this idea of whether or not we can have a new critical take on an architectural project that is presented as a software platform, but where the software platform itself is not maybe goal-oriented tool, or it's not devoted to the idea of optimization, or it's not devoted to the idea of problem solving, but it's kind of devoted to the idea of culture and framing it basically as a space where you can be in, much like we are in Zoom right now. So I think very much, to me at least, the point of the project is you're kind of supposed to be a user, and you're kind of supposed to experience it, and you're supposed to understand it as an open-ended play, not as a goal-oriented play, but an open-ended.
I would 100% respect the designers of Zoom as colleagues of the design disciplines which use media in graphics and interaction design and for particular purposes, and we have clear performance criteria about this. And I actually think that the cyberspace projects we're working on should aim, for instance, to substitute for Zoom and build a space where we, Zoom has very many limitations. We can see about kind of 16 ever, small faces, and then there's 50 or 150 or 350 hidden participants. So there's many limitations, and at the same time, it is already a great tool. So yes, but the project I'm seeing here, I wish it had an agenda which could be specified or at least a domain within which it wants to perform at a certain point in time, and start to compete with Zoom or compete with other tools. So for me, you know, to shift, you know, platform is very vague. Tool is a good starting point, but the tool has a purpose and a performance criterion.
I just, you know, no, I think it really, of course, Patrick, I'm totally with you. You know, my point here is perhaps you don't need to have that in your thesis. You know, perhaps it's not the moment that you can have that already. But I think the aim would be great. And perhaps perhaps what I always liked on architecture, I don't know why, was that if there was the question that something is new or inventive, it only could be recognized once it debated with everything that existed. You know, it reimagined everything that existed through that it appeared as a new thing. And I think if you look, I don't know you have to have that in the moment that you finish, but I think you should try to have a communication with that invisible audience called architecture. Yeah, and it doesn't matter from which culture or whatever, because only then it allows us, you know, to understand the real power or the real idea. So for example, when this thing was there that gravity was not gone, you know, I mean, there was already in modernism a whole idea, what if the ground doesn't exist as another form of space, because it wanted to deliver a completely new idea of a collective society, you know, with a completely different aim, you know, and erasing any kind of histories. But it only could be understood because it had a debate to this culture. And that's what I would wish, you know, because otherwise it could turn out that it is just a, how to say, a toy or something that you just like, and it vanishes tomorrow. And I think for that, the work is too interesting that it's just vanishing.
I mean, you know, I agree with that, Peter. And I got a lot of time for work like this, which just kind of sets up, it sets up the problem, but it doesn't solve it, and it doesn't put the viewer into a mode of production or instrumentalization, but it puts you just kind of into a space of imagination. And I think that's really important. I also think that this kind of putting the viewer, us, the jury, into these kinds of spaces is something that isn't that familiar, except through virtual reality, which I think is quite boring. I think VR was kind of dead on arrival, where it basically just existed to put humans inside of already existing designs to really for clients to show them what it looks like. This is different, and this feels like things can happen when I'm in this environment, and I'm literally gonna interact with it. And I still have this feeling that if we try to tie this to a product, or tie this to a process, or tie this to a specific set of outcomes, I think that might be a little early. I think right now this stuff is pretty raw and pretty rough, and that's normal and good, I think, for a time. Now, if this was 10 years from now, I would have a totally different comment. I would be like, okay, so what does all that add up to? But I feel like we're not there yet.
I don't know, Tom. Maybe it's because I've seen this project a couple of times over the summer. I feel like the language has become maybe a little bit more vague, potentially, but to be completely reductive, I've always thought from the presentations that this was a platform for being a cemetery. And on that level, I think it makes a lot of sense as a kind of programmatic exploration for a virtual space, because you could really question the necessity or really the absurdity of the kind of physical footprint of existing like models for going to a location to kind of memorialize the dead, right? Now I've had kind of similar critiques as well. Like, I wonder if there's a kind of generational or cultural aspect to this, where I'm not completely comfortable with the kind of collection of commodities representing the personality of, or the kind of person of someone who's passed, as a way of remembering them as like the stuff they bought. That's like a whole like deeper neoliberal potential argument there about representation through capitalist
all of
freedom,
that.
right? But like at first I thought, when I saw this, I thought it was like a really cool version of Amazon, that I could like buy all this stuff and see it floating around in 0G. But I think actually, you know, latching onto a really specific program like they have, or maybe they did initially, is what really can start to create the biases or the kind of idiosyncrasies that would, you know, start to give them some criteria to evaluate, like, is this operating in the way that they think they do, so that it doesn't just become a kind of experiment in kind of shape and graphic production. So I actually think now is the perfect time for them to really question if this thing is performing the same kind of social and cultural roles as the cemetery does traditionally. Or the necropolis, I guess, is more probably closer.
Thank you guys for the great comments. We have to move on. We have the next group, please.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Hello everyone.
I'm Gia.
I'm DEEPAK, and we present to you Mega Ferris in LA.
Ferris's moody, mysterious dream towers were always strangely more appropriate to the film noir landscape of Los Angeles than they were ever at home in the infinite grid of New York. This thesis is a collection of Ferris-inspired forms and silhouettes and proceeds to mine their as yet unrealized potentials through various transformations. The goal is to leverage the monumentality of High Ferris's vision but infuse it with contemporary ideas about what constitutes a city today. It observes two issues shaping the development of metropolis. The increasingly crowded urban living environment with issues of access has become difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, the power of FANG company has become considerably impactful to all aspects of urban living. This thesis addresses these concerns by combining hyperdensity with mega-scaled outdoor areas and multiplying the grounds we can occupy and share. The results become a series of architectural surprises, buildings nested within buildings rather than straight interiors divided from exteriors. Mute exteriors without reference to the usual human scale of windows, doors, and balconies, and strange, playful relationships to the ground plane and the surrounding city. These mega buildings ultimately appear like a new, discrete skyline in the city, which itself appears miniature in comparison. The sprawl city becomes an object city.
The project started by taking inspiration from pure fair sketches of New York for a megacity where a city goes vertical. The takeaway from the study was the imagination and the methodology of breaking the big things into smaller parts and giving them their own identity. As a city becomes vertical, words like enclosure, containment become more relevant, which leads to thinking about life in a shell. The president study was used to assemble a kilo part where the relationships of figure-ground relation, the importance of scale mixed-use resolution were realized. The parts in the kit were made with special attention given to orientation, scale, and detail.
We started to imagine the metropolitan cities of future, where the giant futuristic shell from Hugh Ferris now no more belonged to him, but represented the cities of tomorrow. The container shell of the mega building initiated new ways of developing interiors by combining elements from cities like New York and Los Angeles, and were curated with methods like smashing, nesting, stacking to form a coherent organization of architectural components. Understanding the model kit, breaking the structure into parts, we diagonally slice the building to reveal the surprising complex interior and architectural elements which come together to run a city. Mega tries to bring the functioning of an entire city into a common place, envisaging hundreds of acres of land in a vertical giant volume. A tower with 5,300 apartments divided in 507 towers surrounded by commercial spaces. Residential towers are stacked on 15 stepped slabs of a gross area of 376,000 square feet, comprising recreational spaces. Civic amenities are divided off an area of about 5 million square feet in the central space of the tower. The magnificence and monumentality of each tower is realized with the height of almost 3,600 feet, which is 3 times the tallest building in Los Angeles, US Bank, with a height of 1,035 feet.
The scale of the plans can be traced by cutting the towers at different levels. Comparing the plan of famous cities and their hotspot to the floor play in terms of volume, density, and typology exemplify the strangeness and complexity of a functioning city. All kinds of residential, commercial, and public infrastructure is a systematic spatial plan, keeping the fundamental of a building a city. The floor plate are equivalent the small walkable neighborhood, much like the plazas of Rome, where a giant theater, a park, and a row of houses and offices can be accessed in a walkable distance. With Mega, we are trying to create a new spatial realm where the relation between the world and its interior is fusing together. All elements which form a city are unified in a single architectural identity, a hyper object in the heart of Los Angeles. The tower forms a strange skyline in Los Angeles, but also stands in solitary grandeur. The flexibility and the agility of space makes the resolution, varying scales, confusing height and volumes. Altogether form a complex but powerful structure that defines the coming of a new order.
Rosie, it's time to wake up.
Hi guys, so this is my typical get up routine. Recently I became really obsessed with this newly released caffeine-free coffee. It came with a pack of 10 different tastes. You can also choose milkshake or bean options. It's super convenient. It has become a daily essential for me. Honestly guys, you all need to give it a try.
I just got a phone call from the market department. The post Rosie did yesterday of Mulan coffee went really popular. All got sold last night, but there's still thousands of orders pending there. Can you just tell the production factory to produce 1 million today and pack them ready to sell? Also, start to prepare all sideline products of this brand. We need to get them on the market as soon as possible. Trust me, we'll get a big win this time.
Excuse me? Excuse me? Could you take a picture of me in front of the concert hall? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's all.
I have just one question. You know, if you look at the Hugh Ferris renderings, yeah, they always have become famous for showing what you don't see, meaning visualizing the void, yeah, rather than the building, yeah. Now, in your case, these things have a certain presence, a kind of monumentality nearly, like a pyramidic, you know, something. So what is really interesting to me is what was once a totally rationalized object of height limit enveloping, yeah, turns into a kind of nearly pre-modern archaic monument, yeah, like a Aztecian temple, yeah, or something, yeah, like a ziggurat, yeah. What is this? Is this a fallout of a coincidence of a process, or was that an embedded image that was always there, but it could not evaporate? I found it interesting where that came from. And then, yeah, there is something to it, you know, like a kind of a neo-symbolism of monumentality, yeah, something like a, but of ancient time. I don't know. I'm really sorry that I'm so old. It's like as if Hans Hollein, you know, is doing a neo monument in black. You know what I mean? It's like a really. So I wonder why I'm interested is I assume that you don't know these people, yeah, but it's there, it's embedded. So how did you tune that? Did it emerge and suddenly you tuned it to this iconographic, yeah, or to chop it off and put it a head on, you know? You did some operations in order to reveal a quality of that abstract envelope, yeah, that it becomes something beyond its pure coding device.
I'm very stimulated by this project. I mean, maybe less because of its, just because of the scale and the idea of a building which takes on a whole urban district. So I'm really fascinated. And I agree with Peter, there's a certain overtones in this. Hollein speaks through this, but it's actually more the Art Deco. And I think Hugh Ferris wasn't an abstract, had this cathedral, like the kind of the 20th century cathedral, the monument feel to it very much. It was a kind of Gothic for the 20th century. So that speaks through this. And I'm not sure if I'm into that, but maybe it's part of it. But I absolutely think it's a very original, very, very strong, just that audacity of scale and declaring the possibility of such a building. I'm very fascinated. It's really stimulating.
But you see, I think totally agree. But you know, the interesting thing, I think the Rockefeller Center, if it would have built in its original idea, that's how it have looked like.
Yeah, and Berget has made projects like this. I mean, it's fascinating. It's, of course, modernism terminated all of that.
You know, it's interesting. During the presentation, I couldn't tell whether it was a real video of you guys. You had this kind of beautiful treasure chest of architectural devices, like a kit of parts, and they could be resequenced like in a chess game. Whether that was a video or it was real, but yeah, this is it. I have to say, I find this moment the most intriguing when you're pretty explicit about, as a wizard, showing the techniques and certain reassembly strategies. So, for example, if you go back to Ferris, from my excuse the pun, perspective, he's playing with certain topological elements that exaggerate through perspective the actual dimensionality of the towers. And I think that's really quite beautiful, and that the camera views in relation, in all of his renderings, reaffirm the idea of a kind of infinite ascension as building type. And that's obviously something that you find enormous amount of appreciation with, because you've created this almost fractal library of tapered scalar elements that can be recombined and reassembled in a variety of ways to produce, theoretically, what would be an infinite urbanism. Where I'm a little bit perplexed is, given the exquisite invention of the ready-made and the way that you've reinterpreted the ready-made to do a greater range of work, why you felt it was necessary to redeploy them according to a known logic, which was a single point and plan and then build up vertically, rather than consider a distributed model where the system could infiltrate the city and change one's understanding of the towers that are already existing. In other words, I think that that simply through grafting your kit of parts onto pre-existing buildings and figure out the kind of growth script, that you can transform the city from within, rather than have to be so explicitly obvious about the distinction between the new city and the old city.
Evan, I think that I think that's the beauty of it, though, the way they're literally dropped in and on top of an existing city. So this is not an instinct to repair a kind of, you know, anthropocentric skin or tissue. It's not an infill project. It's not even an urban renewal project. It's like literally one city on top of another. And there's something really attractive about that, because it's not a destructive impulse. It's a kind of it's an idea about simultaneity. And if we look back at so much urban planning of the last century, it's almost always, all the visionary projects are almost always about erasure and then putting something new down. And I love the idea that you could have this kind of cacophony of stuff landing. And I think honestly that the choice of doing it in downtown LA is particularly interesting, because there's so much, for a city that has a lot of tall towers, there's actually a lot of ground level parking lots and lack of development. So in a kind of piecemeal urban setting, to drop down these megastructures is pretty interesting.
Don't get me wrong, I think the project's brilliant, and I think it's really amazing, but part of the critique is in the question of scale. I suppose maybe I'm looking for a little bit more ambiguity and a little bit, some noise. The other thing is to be reminded that the inheritance of the project begins from a vantage point, again, which is the point of view that his hypothetical towers are conceived, rather than represent the project entirely from a kind of aerial isometric. It might be interesting to go back down into the city from the position of the occupant and reappropriate the city according to their architectural intervention. That's all.
There would be only one thing, you know. You see, we know this project from OMA in the 70s, you know, and one thing would be interesting, does this thing go beyond the urban block? Because where I think it could be interesting, you know, is its tensionality is not within the urban, as an extrusion of an urban block. What made, for example, Raymond Hood's idea of the city under a single roof so interesting is because suddenly it became an autonomy of its urban fabric, yeah? So I think it would be, what I like on the section, yeah, I see this collapse of scale, yeah, that the thing is larger than just being a block. And I think that's where in the friction to the ground level, you know, it could then turn something else as just being the extrusion of the block, like the parametric extrusion of the block. You know, I think if it goes beyond that, it suddenly collapses on the ground floor and generates probably another kind of urban space or something like that. That's why I see it. Yeah. You see here, for example, look at it. This is the Raymond Hood drawing. The streets goes autonomous from the building. So there is the building collapses its relationship to the urban fabric. And I think that's what I always loved on this project.
I mean, it has some of your mega forms in there. I like the fact that they have kind of whole clusters of towers, skylines embedded in these carve-outs. I mean, that's very strong. That's why also I can imagine that it absorbs a number of existing towers into its base. So there's some very strong concepts here. It's nearly also kind of, it's a scale shift, it's a century shift. It's nearly like the 20th century built on top of the 19th century. Now the 21st century goes on top of the 20th. I mean, it's very stimulating, I have to say. I'm totally taken by it.
It is power, but you see, Patrick, what I like on your comment is, and that's what I architecture. No, but you see, what I like on your comment is, architecture can be really inspirational, powerful. You know, I mean, there is something to architecture. You know, that is really interesting.
I mean, to some extent, you know, Plan Bonzant of Le Corbusier in 1925, the way he blasted across Paris that was a kind of precursor. Because it was, you know, it wasn't full tabula rasa in this case. It was also this huge, beautiful scale shift. It announces a new era, and it makes me thinking of, you know, the Gaia guy. What's his name? Lovelock. He was talking about, you know, the way we can tackle climate change. We have to absolutely concentrate into these mega places where we can huddle together and let half of the planet go to waste. But we're going to have this new eco oasis microclimate in these places.
I'm all in. I'm all in.
It's so funny. I'm having, as you say that, I have the same kind of flashbacks when I look at this project of, like, you know, dystopian science fiction from the 70s. This feels very much, and Super Studio came up before too. There's a lot to the kind of repeat, I think, of what's going on right now at the time that we find ourselves in: social unrest, planetary energy issues. In that time it was fear of atomic war, but now it's maybe fear of the coronavirus. But it's got that kind of ring to it as well for me. But also with a heart. Like, it's one of the things I've always liked about your project, you guys, is that it's kind of like, it's playful. You have the model kit and you're moving the parts around and they're sort of dancing and they look like they can be rearranged at any time. But then it's dark. You know, this is a really dark project. So it reminds me of you know, dark comedy or dark humor, you know, where it's like super dark, but it's also funny. And I think achieving that is a good thing. Now, would it really be like that were it realized, you know, in the city of LA? We did still have that good cheer and humor. I don't know, but I think that's a great thing to shoot for. And I also think that the mega ground plan building is, you know, the capital for this kind of project might have not been available in a different era, but it is now. And it's a weird idea that something like this isn't necessarily a visionary project, but it exists as a building, as a possible building type that's achievable. Strangely.
I'm just curious, guys, what obviously the comment about the transformer, I think Patrick brought that up. There's a kind of episodic freeze where, in like a Russian doll, the larger body detaches itself and is suspended in space and time. To what extent, given the beautiful exuberance and variation of the gold work, how much of the black shell is necessary? It feels, it's curious because from a kind of Genesis standpoint, the gold work is more evolved, and the black work is the tracery from a precedent. And I'm not suggesting the juxtaposition isn't incredibly important and interesting, but I do think it beckons the question that there are two systems at play, and there's an opportunity for one being more dominant and the other being recessive.
I mean, it speaks, you know, if guys should read Bigness. I mean, Kohlhaas is a great reference on many levels in terms of the Deleuze New York and but also Bigness and the depths of this, and you unleash this new regime of complexity, and it shows beautifully. And you need all this voiding, so it becomes it really becomes an urban space in 3D. And I just wanted to ask you a question. I mean, you had in some of the vignettes of the video, you take the kind of stance of a detached irony. I actually quite don't mind it, but is it ironic, or is it a commitment you could make something? I mean, I think I would go for the latter, but or is it a super studio kind of anti-neoliberal kind of dystopia?
You know, I was thinking along those lines into like Evan's comment too about the kind of need for the envelope, the kind of black piece. Like the gold part, especially when you're moving up to this section, is this really exciting kind of three-dimensionally rich, like void-ridden kind of hyper-programmed space, right? But I think maybe the black part is serving somehow to also represent like the kind of heterotopic nature of something this big, like in the sense of Foucault, where the massive black parts are necessary for all the kind of support and service, housing, and the kind of multiple levels, which obviously goes into like, you know, the whole, like it would be really easy to jump into High Rise from Ballard as like a kind of reading of how this project would actually be inhabited. But I think that's probably too reductive because of how sophisticated that central gold part is. So even though like I strongly prefer the kind of hyper articulation of space that you're getting in that central gold part, like maybe the black part is necessary as a kind of active reflection on the kind of programmatic distribution in the building.
Yeah, I think it's really a fantastic project. I was actually thinking about also Edward Wilson's kind of half Earth hypothesis, where he's talking about that if we want to solve like climate crisis, we have to, you know, kind of compress all the humanity into like one very comparatively small city, and everything else will be kind of left to rewilding and nature. You know, I think these kind of like towers that you're making could be models for those experiments. Like, you know, this idea of kind of planetary, new planetary home for humanity made out of these kind of amazing towers that you're producing. And the other thought I had was that in the latest Blade Runner, there was actually a scene at the beginning of the film where similar kind of scale, we are exposed to similar scale. And I was just wondering if this is like larger or smaller than that. And have you thought about this? Because it's kind of the image that we already have culturally exists already, right? This idea of kind of LA being dominated by these kind of triangular mountain-like structures that are kind of massive. And that was already present in the first Blade Runner, but now even in the second one, there is an even larger, they had to kind of like overdo it at some point. So it's an interesting thing what happens to the skyline of LA in the public imaginary after these kind of two films, and how your project kind of plays with that in a fantastic way. Really, it's really awesome.
Thank you guys. Thank you to all the members of the jury for joining us this morning. Congratulations to all the students. Amazing job overall. And you know, this is the beginning of your career, so hopefully you guys have fun and you know, keep that momentum moving forward. All right.
Congratulations, Gia, DEEPAK. Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Nice
Also,
job.
thank you, William. Thank you, William. Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thanks,
Evan,
William.
Patrick,
Great
Tom,
seeing
Damjan.
Nice to see you guys. It's been too long.
Peter.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Congratulations, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Great job.